a glimpse into what will happen if and when the NFL decides to impose a suspension, unpaid, on Deshaun Watson. There's two paths the NFL can go. You can go paid leave, commissioner exempt list, and there's no independent body that gets involved, no disciplinary officer who has any jurisdiction. The commissioner has full and complete discretion to put a player on paid leave. He took it off the table in late March and said, I would just suspend him at this point. He'd probably like to have a do-over on that because right now, I think the best path, the easiest path, the appropriate path is to go with paid leave because, Shireen, the league is worn out. And this is one of the things we reported last night by this drip, more lawsuits, bad news. Yeah. HBO, it all started with the HBO Real Sports feature 24 days ago. Then comes another lawsuit. Then comes the New York Times article from Jenny Vrentas. Then comes another lawsuit. And then two more lawsuits are coming. And then who knows how many more. You got to wait until basically the middle of March next year when the statute of limitations on any potential plaintiffs will close, assuming that Deshaun Watson was properly aware once he got sued the first time that he should stop getting massage therapists via Instagram, and there isn't anyone else who could sue after the middle of March. But this just all points to we don't know how bad this is going to get. We don't know how many plaintiffs are going to be. We don't know what other stories are going to be out there. Who else is going to come out of the woodwork with claims? The best approach, and there were people in the league office before all this started in the past few weeks, Shireen, who firmly believed that Deshaun Watson should not play until these cases are resolved. That's a very real threshold issue for the NFL as it decides what to do, paid leave or unpaid suspension. And I think the NFL, even though the commissioner said that it won't be paid leave, I think that as of right now, they're still having that debate.
Yeah, Mike, and this may not get resolved, their investigation, before the season starts. So you know the Browns want to know before training camp, but the NFL, if they came back and didn't put him on the commissioner exempt list, let's say, until right before the season started, would really mess up the Browns and their plans. Could you see that happening? Could you see him going through training camp and then the NFL deciding at that point, right before the season, them saying, all right, we're putting you on the commissioner exempt list now until these cases are resolved? Or do they have to do it, in your mind, before the training camp even starts?
Well, I'd like to think they pick a lane before training camp starts for the benefit of everyone. So we all know what's going on, because this whole thing is about managing PR. And if we get to the start of training camp and they haven't done anything at all, and they wait until the literal last minute to put him on paid leave when week one rolls around, that will mushroom into even more of a distraction and even more of an issue. I think the time to make a decision is upon us. The time to implement it at the latest is the start of training camp. And if it's going to be unpaid leave, it's going to take time because it's a three-step process. One, the league proposes a suspension, and the union is bracing for an unprecedented proposal from the league. Then, Judge Sue L. Robinson, retired federal judge from Delaware, who has been hired by the league and the union to serve in this capacity as disciplinary officer, a new facet of the personal conduct policy as of 2020, first big test for it. She takes over, has a hearing, makes a decision, and then, unless she finds no discipline at all, the commissioner steps in with full discretion on appeal, including saying to Judge Robinson, thank you for your service, but I'm going to go with what the league proposed at the outset. And I think what will happen is, because there's going to be a political aspect to it, there's going to be a PR aspect to what is a PR tool. The league starts high. Judge Robinson goes lower. Then Roger Goodell strikes a middle ground. So I think that's one of the reasons why I believe the union is bracing for an unprecedented recommendation, because you want to start high and then you've got room to do something more reasonable when it's finally done, and it represents a middle ground between whatever the league wanted and whatever Judge Robinson imposes. But the one thing that the league is not going to do is put itself in a position to be accused of not being aggressive enough. Not after Ray Rice nearly resulted in the commissioner losing his job. So that may be a way to navigate this new system. You do some, 1 year or more, this is what we want. What we ultimately get is going to be different, but at least we get the headlines, the news cycle. NFL's, just like Trevor Bauer, 2 years from Major League Baseball, well, he's got appeal rights. But what we talk about, 2 years, what he eventually gets is going to be different potentially. But that's part of what the NFL has to take into account, Shireen. Major recommended suspension that works out to something less than that through this process.
Yeah, and that makes the most sense, Mike. And the one thing I do know about that this is messy, and it's getting messier by the day. And as you said, it's a PR deal. But this is messy for Deshaun. It's messy for the Browns. It's messy for the Texans. It's messy for the NFL. And other owners could be sucked into this thing, as you wrote about yesterday. So by the day, this is just not going away. And in fact, it's getting worse and worse for the NFL. So at some point, there does become a PR angle to this thing that we've got to stop the flow here. And I think the commissioner exempt list is the best way to do that, Mike.
At a minimum, 3 owners will be drawn into this fight, voluntarily or not, and obviously they don't want to be in the middle of it. But what the union is going to argue, and we reported this yesterday, if and when there is an unpaid suspension that forces the union, under its federal duty of fair representation, to represent the interests of Deshaun Watson, there's 2 things that the union can do. 1, fight for him under the argument that he didn't do it and he shouldn't get any punishment. 2, the alternative argument, even if you are compelled to take action, the action must be in fair proportion to the action that you took or didn't take against owners, because it's right there in the personal conduct policy. Owners are held to a higher standard. So, to the extent that precedent matters, and it may not matter to Roger Goodell. Roger Goodell wants to do whatever he wants to do, and if it happens to mesh with precedent, so be it. He's going to make a decision based upon these facts and whatever he needs to do right now. Judge Robinson may say, okay, well, you make a good point, NFL Players Association. And what that means is, for example, Dan Snyder, whatever the NFL decided based upon whatever facts they've kept hidden, all of a sudden you're going to have a request that Judge Robinson require to make available to the NFLPA all the findings from Beth Wilkinson, what she would have recommended if they had bothered to ask her to put her recommendation in writing or ask for a verbal recommendation, which would have been force this guy to sell the team. So that's a fair way to make an apples-to-apples comparison. What did you do to an owner where the bar is supposedly higher, and what are you going to do to Deshaun Watson in this specific set of circumstances he's facing? Robert Kraft, he had the solicitation arrest in Florida. Now, ultimately, charges dismissed because there was a finding that this law enforcement exercise in video surveillance was a blatant violation of the rights of anybody who went into that room for a massage, including many who went in for nothing but a massage. That is something for which there was no discipline. That's the closest apples-to-apples comparison, although there was never any claim that Robert Kraft engaged in any force or coercion. There were never any lawsuits filed against him. It was a criminal charge that went away because law enforcement overreached in its effort to harvest evidence. But still, owners are held to a higher standard, and you didn't do anything at all. Did you even investigate it? Did you do anything? Did you just ignore it? Jerry Jones, Shireen, something that continues to confound me. The voyeurism scandal involving his right-hand man, Rich Dalrymple. No investigation by the league. None whatsoever. A week or so after the league said, we can't let Washington investigate itself, the league was fine with the Cowboys investigating themselves and brushing it all under the rug in 2015. That's going to be the other one. So it's Snyder, Kraft, and Jones. They are going to be the focal points of part of the Deshaun Watson defense, saying whatever you do to him needs to fairly reflect what you didn't do to these 3 guys, especially since your own policy says they're held to a higher standard than players.
It's the absolute best point they can make, Mike, and it's a valid point. And these guys weren't held to a higher standard. They were held to a far lower standard than Ben Roethlisberger or Ezekiel Elliott or Deshaun Watson even is going to be held to. So it's a great point, and it's the best point that they have. And I don't know how this ends for the owners, but yeah, they didn't serve punishment that was equal to what a player would have served under the same circumstance. There's no question about that. So we can just forget the portion of they are held to a higher standard, because we all know that just didn't happen in these three cases.
And to continue my habit of shamelessly plugging my book Playmakers, which Shireen used to have behind her. I don't know what happened to it, but it's not there. It's been replaced by a baseball cap, for crying out loud. I guess the Astros have been on a good run or something, or she wouldn't have it out there. But there's a whole section focused on owners, and one of the themes is, are they really held to a higher standard? And is the punishment that's imposed on them ever a fair reflection of the punishment that gets imposed on players? Let me just give you a quick example. And I don't know that this will come up in the Deshaun Watson case, but these are things to consider. When you suspend an owner, when you suspend a player, he loses all of his financial compensation. It's gone. He loses it. You suspend him 6 weeks, he loses 6 weeks of the only money he ever makes in football. It's gone. And for most players, that is the vast majority of what they make. There's some off-field stuff, but it's not that much. You lose the bulk of your income for 6 weeks. When Jim Irsay got suspended 6 weeks after he had a driving while impaired arrest several years back, he wasn't allowed to go to the games. He still got his money. He still got his share of the TV funds. He still got his ticket money. He didn't get suspended in the way that a player does. He didn't have his major and primary financial compensation choked off for 6 months, or 6 weeks, excuse me. So it really isn't apples to apples when they punish or when they don't. And Shireen, look, I like the approach of going after what the league did or didn't do with Snyder, Kraft, and Jones. You could throw another one on there, too, who just so happens to be the guy who gave Deshaun Watson his $230 million contract. Jimmy Haslam, for some reason, was never scrutinized by the NFL for being the guy at the top of the ladder of an inherently corrupt organization that cheated customers out of millions of dollars. And people went to jail beneath him. For some reason, they never tried to make it stick to him. So he was either Mr. Magoo and oblivious to what was happening in the company that allowed him to raise the money that enabled the purchase of the Cleveland Browns, or he was a mastermind who somehow managed to skate away without consequence. But I don't think the league did anything, ever even considered taking action against Jimmy Haslam, and here he is, the guy who now employs Deshaun Watson.
Yeah, and it's a great point, Mike. And there's probably other owners out there who aren't coming to mind right away that they could throw in there as well. But it's a great point they're going to make, and it's something that the NFL is going to have to answer for eventually, based on the direction the NFLPA is going to go. And it's a good direction to go. And I don't know how you defend that if you're the NFL. You can't.
The epigraph to The Godfather from Balzac: behind every great fortune there is a crime. Sometimes in front of every great fortune there's a crime as well. And a lot of times, depending upon who's making the decisions, if it's somebody who is paid by the people who own those teams, things get swept under the rug.
Hi, I'm Mike Tirico, and thanks for watching. Make sure to hit subscribe for the latest news and highlights from NBC Sports.